I texted him about 10 minutes
Okay,
ago.
good. Okay, good. Okay.
Okay, so we are by 314, Seif 7, Seif Zayin. So 1 to 6 talks about Baina and Seiser, those two malachis. So it's talking about building and demolishing. And it was talking about as connected to jugs. Now the coming few seifim, we're going to be dealing with these malachis also, but not as they apply to the jug itself, but rather as it applies to different types of locks and fasteners that are, again, we're not talking about something connected to the ground, because something connected to the ground, you have actual building and taking apart. We're talking here about a kli, which is either we're talking about meaning something that's not connected to the ground, and it's not 3 cubits by 1 cubit by 1 cubit by 3 cubits. So not like a regular full-size refrigerator would be considered connected to the ground. We're talking about smaller things. So just going back to remind ourselves, the whole thing goes back to what we spoke about in the Gemara. Says that Baina and Seiser, building and demolishing, does not apply to Kalim. It does not apply to movable objects. So there is a dispute among the Rishonim as to what this means. Some hold that absolute Baina and Seiser apply. That when it's a complete, if I was to take a complete keli and destroy it, or put apart from scratch a complete keli, it does apply. And some hold no, even then it does not apply. On the other hand, all would agree that when it's an inferior kli, when it's an inferior movable object, then it's not. It would not be forbidden under Seiser, under taking apart, under demolishing. So now we're going to discuss about how that applies to different kinds of fasteners. We're going to talk about a rope that's tied to that secures a cover. There's a metal or wooden lock of a kli. Again, if we're talking about it's a metal or wooden lock, the door of a house, now it's not a kli. Now we're talking something that's connected to the ground. You have even partially, if you do it, it's a problem of building and demolishing. Or hinges that hold a kli together. So 7. So fasteners of kalim, like for example, a chest, a crate, a closet, that the cover is tied with a rope. He's allowed to untie the rope, or to cut it with a knife, or to take apart its like the weaving of the rope, like you can undo the weaving of the rope. But that's specifically when it's like the tying of a rope or similar. However, a lock of wood or metal, you're not allowed to crack it open or the shaber to break it. The kalim nami shaykh binyan gomer or sirgmor, because the mechaber holds like the stringent view that even by kalim, absolute building and absolute demolishing is still a problem. Umitamze, and for the same reason, also lohasirat sirim shekerim goinzish. You're not allowed to take apart the hinges, which are called goinzish. Shacheri atevus, that's in the back of crates. Even never damavteach, if the key was lost. So that's just, you can't crack the lock, and you also can't. Oh, fine. You know what? I won't crack the lock. I'll just take out the hinges from the back and open it that way, and then I don't need to crack the lock. So also you can't do that. V'yesh matirim bazu, but there are those who allow this. And similarly, regarding, he's like jumping back now to the lock itself, there are some that allow and some that don't allow. Like we said before, there's somebody showing him that hold that absolute building and demolishing there is a problem, and only if it's inferior building and demolishing there's no problem. So in this case, the Mechaber holds it to be absolute building and demolishing, and he says therefore, according to those that which he himself holds, it would seem that according to those that do not allow absolute building and demolishing by Kalim, it would not be allowed, and there are those that allow it. Sorry, I missed the last part. Al Yedei Eini Yehudi. There are those that allow, but even by the lock to be done. No, sorry, I didn't miss it. That was a period. There's some that allow it, and there's some that don't allow it. However, the Mechaber continues, V'yesh lahatir al Yedei Eini Yehudi. This can be allowed by a non-Jew doing it, because if you remember, when it comes to Amir L'Nachri, to having a non-Jew do it, we are more lenient if there is a valid opinion that allows it. Now I'm guessing we didn't get there yet, but I'm guessing the Alter Rebbe will hold only l'tzairich mitzvah or l'tzairich, because if you remember, the Alter Rebbe held that the only time you could allow it if there is such an opinion, but only in a case of great need or the need of a mitzvah. Then you can allow it if there's an opinion that holds it's not a problem at all, even though in principle we're not holding by those opinions. However, having a non-Jew do it, you can do it. The Mechaber doesn't say that even with a great need or whatever, he just states it straight out. And but I'm guessing that there are those, including the Alter Rebbe, that will hold only if it's a great need. I can't hear you. You're muted.
Right. I'm saying he says it's allowed, but as a yesh lahatir, not as like the main thing. He says
Right.
there are those that allow it, but he doesn't
Right.
He doesn't qualify
but he
it by
doesn't
a
qualify by
yesh lahatir with hefs and muruba or whatever, and the
Right.
Ramah doesn't jump in either. So we'll
Right.
see. Maybe Mishnah Berura kind of
Yeah.
guides.
So let's see if the Mishnah Berura will maybe clarify more about this. So let's see. So Mishnah Berura 29.
So yeah, nice.
Yeah, the fasteners of Kalim, who Loshin Sigira. This is the this wording means a closing, something that closes it.
Everybody wants closure.
Yeah, everyone wants closure. See, meaning that their cover is held closed tied with ropes. It's tied down with ropes. That's what holds it on. So he's allowed to take it off. Why? The lav kesher shekayamahu, because it's not a lasting tie. Because we know that even by tying, let's forget for a second building and taking apart. There's an additional problem of tying.
Right, double knot.
But in this case, but that's only when it's a knot that is made to be lasting. If it's a knot that's not made to be lasting, then you don't have this problem. Because it's a closure for a crate top. It's made to be open. It's just by its very use is such that it's made to be opened and closed regularly. Or to cut it with a knife. It's not called demolishing. Mishum the love stealing murahizoi, because this is not a complete demolition. And it's not according to everybody when it's an inferior. When you're destroying something inferior, which a piece of rope that's used to tie, it's considered an inferior thing. So therefore, everybody holds it's not. There's no prohibition by Kalim, this sort of demolition. Where on the other hand, where we talk about later on, so the Mishnah was saying, so what's the difference later where he says that the lock of wood, that's not allowed, or of metal, because that is not an inferior thing like a rope, and therefore it's absolute building or demolition, in this case demolition, and therefore according to at least the Rishonim that the Mechaber follows, that's a problem. You can't do absolute building and demolition. Or to take apart its plated strands, it's take apart its weaving. That according to how the Be'er Halacha understands the Rambam, there would be a problem of this, not because of demolition actually, but because of Keishur Matir, because of this tying and taking apart tying. So according to the Rambam, taking apart these strands of a rope, some hold that is no problem in that. The Rambam holds in principle that there is that taking apart the strands of a rope is the same as undoing a knot, is considered undoing a knot, which is a prohibition. Let's see, I guess let's go into the notes quickly. A was because it's not a permanent knot, because it's meant to be constantly undone, the Mishnah Berura says.
Right.
Matir, untying a knot, is one of the malachas forbidden on Shabbos. The malacha does not apply to knots that are meant to be untied on a constant basis.
Right. Well, like what you brought up, in fact.
Yeah. Right. So that's what we're talking about with the whole thing with Rambam there. Let's see, note B is that it's not called seisi because it's not absolute demolition, and therefore is not prohibited according to all opinions. That is, even according to the Rishonim, will maintain that the malacha of seiser, of demolishing, does apply to kalim. They would agree that cutting a rope is permitted because it's not considered absolute demolishing. Why? Because the rope is made of relatively inferior material. So it has the status of an inferior kli, which, according to everybody, an inferior kli is not considered absolute demolition. Next note, this is contrast to a wooden or metal lock, which is absolute demolition. That is the Shulchan Aruch, who rules that absolute seiser does apply to kalim, so that's why he forbids breaking a lock, because a lock, whether of wood or of metal, whatever, is something that it's not an inferior thing, and therefore it's considered you would still have that problem. Now, mitzad, the whole thing with the Rambam holds that braiding a rope is a violation of keishur, tying a knot, and unraveling the weaving of a rope is a violation of the counterpart, untying a knot, matir. So the Berura Halacha discusses how to reconcile this Rambam with the Gemara, which seems to maintain that the only potential problem is seiser, is demolishing. So then, why does the Gemara not mention untying? The Chazon Ish maintains that the Rambam would actually permit unraveling a rope. Why? Because one's purpose, he doesn't have any need for the rope for the unraveling of the rope. His intention is not to unravel the rope. He doesn't care for it. It's not that saying it's strictly gufa. He doesn't need the unraveling of the rope. Rather, he's just trying to access the contents inside. So he's not interested in affecting the rope in any way, and therefore he's not considered to be involved in the malacha of matir, which is consistent with the Chazon Ish approach to also to seiser, as well as tearing, demolishing, undoing a matir, all these things. The Chazon Ish holds that if it's ain't tzricha legufa, if it's not, you have no interest in the thing that you're undoing or destroying or tearing, then it's not. But it's rather just because you're trying to access something completely different. So he holds this to not be a problem. Mishna Berura 33. Also, lo hasir atzirim. You're not allowed to take out the hinges. The kishviras pesachas damya, because it's similar to opening to breaking a lock. In other words, same like the Mishna said before. This is it's not an inferior kli. So if it's not an inferior, according to the Mechaber, if it's something that's not of inferior quality, is called absolute demolition, and therefore the hinges, just like the lock, is the problem. And similarly, the Mechaber hold the other way around, that putting back the door of a kli on its hinges is building. It's like we had before when we were talking about the doors of Kalim and the issues with that. That putting the hinge in would be a building, even though the Gemara says that there is no building and demolishing by Kalim, but putting on a door, this would be not something of an inferior quality, and therefore it's absolute building, and according to the Mechaber et al, and those who hold that way, it would be a problem. Shel Tavis. So the Mechaber uses the language of breaking the locks of crates. So the Mishnah just points out he doesn't mean just crates specifically. He's just using crates as an example there, but the same would apply to any vessel. Yesh matir, there's those who allow it. Svira le de ein shayach. Sorry, I jumped over here. Let's go back. We were talking about the Hosea Tzirim, the hinges, and there are those that allow this. Why? Because they hold that it's not similar to breaking a lock. So that means we're talking about ones who, even people who hold that absolute stira is a problem. However, even with them, there is a svara that it's not similar to breaking a lock, and it is stira garuahu. It is a lesser. It is a lesser demolition, meaning it's a more inferior demolition. Why? Because he does not actually have to break anything. If he had to break something, then we say that it's a problem. So by a lock, he would have to actually break it. On the other hand, when it's coming to a hinge, he's not actually breaking anything. He's just taking it apart. So they hold that it's different than a lock. That a lock would be more stringent. Note that according to everybody, it would be also to put in the hinges or the lock using nails. Meaning, if you're going to take a lock and you're going to nail it to the thing, right? You have like the loop and the thing, and you're going to nail it to the thing, or alternatively, you have hinges and you're going to nail it to the thing. Everybody holds that this is a problem. So that's not what we're talking about. Here we're talking about breaking the lock or undoing the pin from the hinge. We're not talking about attaching or alternatively detaching the nails. The tikkun mana, because it's tikkun mana. It is makabepatish. It is finishing touches when you're nailing in a lock or nailing in hinges. The ayin b'chay adam shekosta afilu yedei Yehudi asur, and see that the chay adam holds that even through a non-Jew it is not allowed. The havi melacha deiraisa, because that is a forbidden action from the Torah itself. Whereas the only time that we're allowing it through a non-Jew, is if it's derabanan, and furthermore, if there are those that hold that it's not a problem. Yeah, you need both of those things in order for it to be allowed by a non-Jew. It has to be a non-Torah prohibition. It has to be only a prohibition, a sage level prohibition. And additionally, it has to also be that there are those that allow it. In this case, the Chayyim points out, when you're nailing the thing in, that is finishing touches. That is actually a forbidden thing according to the Torah, and therefore it is not allowed even through a non-Jew. Yesh matir. Let's see. Yesh matir. That's Mishna Berura 36. That there are those that maintain that breaking the locks even you're allowed. Right? He said there's those that allow it, those that do not allow it, but we could allow it by a non-Jew. Because that is the opinion that holds that Seiser does not apply at all to Kalim. And Kamesh Vyadlosif Aleph Mishna Berura, the Yeshenim Shesavim Kain, the Av Shed the Mechaber Sasam Tchila B'Sif Zeh Gufa B'Shviris B'Sachs L'Isur, Afilu Hachi Hevi Kad Dash Yesh Matirin, Kedei Lismech Alein Lahakal Akopan V'Dein Yehudi, Kamesh Masayim Achakach Elisa B'Yosisa. So there's a different reason. The reason that he says that some allow by hinges is a different thing. It's because he's not talking about those Rishonim who hold that you're not allowed to do absolute demolition. Why? Because if that's the case, why only by tzidin? Then why not also by the locks? Rather, what he's saying is that there are those that even those that hold that you're not that absolute demolition does apply by Kalim, and therefore you cannot open the lock, you cannot break open the lock. But even so, there are those that would hold that the hinge you can open up. Why? Because they view that as being inferior, because you're not actually breaking it like you are with the lock, rather you're just undoing the pin. And therefore, they view that as being not as much of a demolition, and they allow it. Now he brings up, and there are those that even allow breaking the lock. So that we're talking about already. Those that hold that breaking that demolition does not apply at all during Kalim, and therefore they hold that not just the hinges, but even the lock itself, if you break it, it's fine. Why does he bring it up here? He brings it up here so that he could let you know why he's allowing it in the case of a non-Jew to do it. That since we have who to rely on, we can do it. Now, of course, the Chai Adam points out that by hinges, now again, not by undoing the hinges, that we already said, but if it's nailing in the hinges, that nobody allows. That's because that's a whole different problem. That's makim bepatish, right? Tikkun mana. You're doing finishing touches, and that you would not even be allowed to do through a non-Jew, because anything that a non-Jew it requires two things. It requires A, that it's a rabbinical, and B, that somebody else allows it. That one of that place can allow it. In this case, it's not a rabbinical. It's a Torah a prohibition, and therefore knocking nails in, according to everybody, you're not allowed to do, and you're not even allowed to ask a non-Jew to do it. Let's see the notes. This is that it's similar. There are those that prohibit removing the hinge. Why? Because it's similar to breaking a lock, and therefore it is considered seiser. So here the Mishnah Berura is talking to the hinge pins that hold the two sections of the actual hinge together. This stringent view, which is Rabbeinu Peretz, maintains that dismantling the hinge pins is treated the same as breaking the metal or wooden lock, since in both cases, one is dismantling an intact, significant kli. So therefore, the malach of Seiser, according to this stringent opinion, applies. F, likewise, putting the door of a kli back on its hinge would be baina, would be building. The Mishnah Berura here teaches that just as Rabbeinu Peretz views sliding out a hinge pin as absolute seiser, as absolute demolition, likewise he would view sliding the door back in to be baina, which is logical. If he holds this to be seiser, he holds that to be baina. Now the Gemara states that putting a door back in place is forbidden only by rabbinic law. Why? Due to the concern, like we had before, it's only out of a concern that you might wedge it in strongly, which would violate biblical law. Rabbeinu Peretz, who maintains that putting the door back on its hinge is a violation of biblical law, would explain that the Gemara there means that one may not put a door back into place without placing it on its hinge, meaning without putting it on its hinge, to concern that he might put it back on its hinge. And that's what the Gemara there means by when you're not doing it strongly, you'll come do it strongly. So according to him, that means that if you put it not on its hinge, you'll come to put it on its hinge. So he holds that that putting it on its hinge is a rabbinical thing. That's considered wedging it strongly.
Well, no. We said no, because putting it on the hinge would be deraisa under Baina. So not putting it on the hinge,
right.
even when it's not put on the hinge.
In other words, Rabbeinu Peretz is considering put it on its hinge. That's what wedging it strongly means. That's part of wedging it strongly. If you put it on its hinge, even if it's not strong, putting it on its hinge equals wedging it strongly. Therefore, deraisa. And so therefore, he would explain the other thing where we said that putting it is only rabbinical, that you're not mabish putting it on its hinge, you're putting it in, but not with the hinges in. That's what the Gemara means is the rabbinical one. Yeah. Now, what are we holding by? So some who permit this, we're talking about that they permit the hinge, putting the pin in and out of the hinge. Why? Because one is not actually causing the cleat to fracture. He's simply sliding out the hinge pin that holds it together. Chazon Ish explains that the hinge pin creates a relatively loose connection, which is comparable to a refurbished kli, right? Which, like we said, a refurbished kli is considered an inferior kli, and therefore the malacha of seiser doesn't apply according to everybody. Magen Avram, however, implies that the connection is strong, and he holds that a hinge pin connection is called a strong connection, and it is permitted only because the crate will remain a kli even after the hinge pin is removed. So even when you're removing the hinge thing, it still is a kli. You haven't changed it from being a kli. It's no more and no less of a kli than it was before.
I just want to comment on the word where they use the word refurbished a lot. It's funny because in my mind, like today's modern age, when you see something say refurbished, especially with technology, electronics, it usually means refurbished to like new status. But here it's Badavka talking about where it's just reconstructed. It's like the plate that cracks and you put it back together with the glues, even with the fancy golden glue, it makes it look nicer than it did before. But still, it's something that's pieces put back together. It's not refurbished like new. It's reconstructed. It's Frankenstein's monster.
Refurbished here does not mean that it's necessarily refurbished to Apple's standards.
Right. It's Frankenstein's monster. There's bolts sticking out.
Right.
And stitching.
We're talking more steampunk refurbished here.
Steampunk, right? But Dafka than bolts sticking out.
We're not talking about back to factory specs here.
Right. Doesn't look like new at all.
Not just that Adrab. If you were to bring it back to factory specs, you're dealing with a new Keli then.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm bringing it up because it's not just stam refurbished. If it was like refurbished how we think of it nowadays, that would be a problem. The whole thing is that it's not like that, and that it's still considered broken.
Right, therefore it's inferior. Yeah. It's funny how words could in different times and different things they could take on a whole different meaning. That's where in this case, a refurbished that way would actually not be inferior; it'd be completely a problem.
Right, context is everything. I think context is always makes such a huge difference.
So the Magen Avram holds that you're not changing it from being a kli or not a kli, and that's why it's not a problem. Footnote H below, the Sharat Tziyun applies the Magen Avram even to dismantling the hinge itself, not just the hinge pin, when it is nailed to the kli. Which that's a chiddush there, but then again, Makim Pat is only when you're nailing it back in, you'd have a problem maybe. But maybe even then you're not making it or taking it's not making it a kli. By the same token, this view, which is that of the Rim Kinon, Rabbi Yaakov of Kinon, would maintain that there is no biblical prohibition in placing the door of a kli back onto its hinge. Why? Because you could say the same thing. You're not making it into a kli. It was a kli already before you put it on there. It's a usable kli even without it. It's not entirely clear whether Rim Kinon would maintain that it is forbidden by rabbinical law due to concern that one might wedge the hinge back into place firmly, such as with nails, which would be then, of course, forbidden by biblical law. So it's unclear how he holds on that. The Taz clearly holds that there is no such prohibition. The Gemara cited in the previous note, which forbids installing a door of a kli due to concern for wedging, that refers only to a different type of hinge described in Mishna Berura 313, note 37, where there is a serious concern that one might wedge it in firmly. Sharetzion here, the next footnote, however, seems to imply that this is the view of the Taz himself. But others may disagree. They might hold that this is just a view that the Taz is bringing up rather than his own psak. The Siman Berura 313:38, which seems to indicate that the sliding the door on the hinge is forbidden according to everybody. However, see the Shai Tzion who disagrees. Anyway, a lot of people think a lot of different things about that. H. So note that all agree that one may not fasten the hinge of the lock of the kli with nails, because this is considered tikkun mother, which is fashioning a kli. This is a prohibition under makeh b'patish. It's a tulda of makeh b'patish, of the final blow. The prohibition against the Shari Tzion says the prohibition against fastening the hinge with nails appears in the Magen Avraham. It seems obvious to me, says the Shari Tzion, that even the Taz in note 8, who is inclined to say that according to those who are lenient with regard to removing a hinge pin, like the Rimakinon, it is likewise permitted to put the door of a kli on its hinge, like we said before. However, it seems to Shari Tzion that even the Taz would nonetheless concede that fastening the hinge to a kli with nails is prohibited by biblical law, because that would be included in the concern that one might wedge it very firmly, for which everybody agrees one is liable achatos, meaning everybody agrees it is a biblical level prohibition, as set forth by the Taz. That is, even the Rimakinon holds, according to the Taz, that one may slide the door onto its hinge without concern for firm wedging, would agree that fastening the hinge of the kli with nails constitutes a very firm wedging and is forbidden by biblical law. The Magen Avraham states as follows: all agree that it is forbidden to fasten the hinges with nails, for that is tikkun mana. This, however, removing the hinge is mekalkel. Levush Yisrael interprets the Magen Avraham as saying that all agree that one may not slide the door onto the hinge, meaning that he holds that the Magen Avraham is arguing with the Taz, because the Magen Avraham says everybody holds you cannot, where we see the Taz holds that the Rima cannot hold you can. This would mean that the Magen Avraham is not addressing a case where the hinge is being attached with nails. This is not the correct interpretation according to the Shari Tzion, because when the Magen Avraham ends, but this, i.e. removing the hinge, is permitted because it is not tikkun mana, because it's destructive, he does not mean to imply that even Rimakinon permits sliding the hinge pin out only because it is destructive, but would forbid inserting the hinge pins by biblical on tikkun mana, even though it is not nailed to the kli. In truth, the Rimakinon would hold that sliding the hinge pins onto its place is permitted, at least on a biblical level. What the Magen Avraham means to say is that the language of the Shulchan Aruch, which states some permit removing the hinges that are in back of the crates, indicates that removing the hinge itself from the kli, not just the hinge pin, is also permitted, despite the fact that it would be that it is nailed to a kli. On that point, the Magen Avraham writes that the reason is because it's destructive, and by makeh b'patish, unlike baina and seiser and kaisher and matir, right? Unlike building versus demolition and tying versus untying, by makeh b'patish there is no counter malacha of unmakeh b'patishing. It's only a one way, whereas being mekalkel, messing it up is not, at least on a biblical level, there's no thing there. And when Magen Avram wrote earlier that the Mekinon permits removing the hinges because there is no need to break anything, which serves to explain why there's no issue of Seiser, he means to explain not only why there is no issue of Seiser in removing the hinge pin, right? Why there's no demolishing in it, but even why there is no issue of Seiser in dismantling the hinge pin, the hinge from the Kli, not just the pin from the hinges. That is, that dismantling the hinge from the Kli does not fracture the Kli. Therefore, there is no inyan of Seiser, even if you actually take off the whole hinge, not just the hinge pin. This is unlike the view of some Achrayim who write to the Magen Avram disagrees with the Taz, who holds it's permitted, according to the view of Rebbe Kinon, to insert the hinge pin into the hinge, or to put the door of the Kli back onto its hinge. Those Achrayim hold that, according to the Magen Avram, even Rebbe Kinon would forbid inserting the hinge pin or putting the door back on its hinge because it's tikkun mana. In my humble opinion, it's not my humble opinion. I don't have even a humble opinion. It is obvious that Magen Avram is not talking about that at all. He's speaking only about fastening the hinge to a kli with nails. That would be makim bepatish, and therefore you cannot do that. That would be forbidden according to everybody. In some, which is good because that's a long what's it called? In some, nailing the hinge to the kli is forbidden by biblical law under tikkun mana. Sliding the hinge into place or putting the door back on its hinge is forbidden by biblical law, according to Rabbeinu Peretz, under building baina. Now, and then there's the view of Rebbe Kinon, in which the Taz holds that it is entirely permitted, while others may hold that it's forbidden by rabbinical law. So only Rabbeinu Peretz holds that putting the hinge pin back into its pin or putting the door back on a hinge is forbidden from a biblical level. 3, dismantling the hinge itself from the kli or sliding out the hinge pin is forbidden according to Rabbeinu Peretz under Seiser, under demolishing. However, it is permitted according to Rebbe Kinon. There is no issue of Seiser because the kli itself is not being fractured according to him. And there's no issue of tikkun mana because it's not destructive. So he holds there's no problem on either of those things. Give me 1 second here. Let me get a tissue so I can get my ends to sound less like these. I don't know. Is it called a cold if you get one in the summer, or is it called a hot? I got a hot. Okay.
Does that have to do with the temperature outside, or does it have to do with your own body temperature? Maybe I don't know. Either way,
not sure. Because how do you catch it? Maybe it means you caught it with somebody else. I don't know. Anyways, so now, let's see, Jay is talking about that some permit because they what are they permitting again? Along with involved. Some permit even, we said, not only the hinges, but some permit even breaking the lock itself. Why? Because they hold that there is no demolishing by Kalim, period. Even absolute demolishing doesn't make a difference. Don't exist, no problem. So, Siman Berura note 7 for elaboration, section of introduction. Okay, if I assert this, a lenient opinion holds that absolute Seiser applies to Kalim, but breaking the lock doesn't apply as absolute Seiser. So there's some that hold that that's not what the reasoning is there. And the Mishnah Berura is explaining it as what the Mechaber is talking about is those who allow Seiser by Kalim, whereas there are those that would say, like the Chazon Ish, for example, that the lenient opinion here is not because of, he's not referring to that lenient opinion in the Gemara. He's saying besides for those, even from those who hold that absolute Seiser is a problem, who would still allow it because they don't hold this to be, they don't hold it to qualify as absolute Seiser. Okay, so okay, so he cites his opinion of those who permit it. Why? Why does Mechaber cite that opinion? Is so that he's using it to rely upon for the leniency through a non-Jew doing it, as appears in the Beis Yosef. This is in accordance with the general rule that when a matter is subject to dispute amongst Rishonim, one may rely on the lenient view with respect to instructing a non-Jew to perform, like we said before. So the reason he's bringing up this lenient view is not because he's leading to agree with it in any way, shape, or form, but because when it comes to Amil and Nachri, when it comes to instructing a non-Jew, if there are valid opinions that allow it, then there is more room for leniency in telling a non-Jew to do it on Shabbos. A non-Jew, there are those who stated that this leniency is specifically when so this is Lamed Zayin. So we know over here V'yesh, and this is the Mishna Berura Lamed Zayin. V'yesh Kosvu, and there are those that write the Davka behefset meruba. I should nechbos harbe, let's say mitzvah. So there are those who hold, like we said before, there are those that hold that this leniency, right, meaning the leniency that right, we just said there's a general rule that when a matter is subject to dispute among the Rishonim, we could, as far as telling a non-Jew to do it, we could allow it. The Mishnah Berura points out that there are those that do not give a carte blanche here. It's not a blanket allowance, but rather it is there are those that maintain that it is only when there is a substantial financial loss, or when there is the great need to perform a mitzvah. So, for example, let's say he has wine in this crate, and he's not going to be able to make kiddush because his wine is in that crate. Then he could tell a non-Jew to open the crate. Of course, he should be careful if the wine is not mevushal, because then he comes to a whole different problem. This is the opinion of the Yam Shel Shleima, which the opinion of the Yam, and the Pri Megadim explains that according to Yam Shel Shleima, the lenient view is not a consideration since the halacha has clearly been determined and according with the stringent view, right? So that's why the Yam Shel Shleima, the Pri Megadim explains that the Yam Shel Shleima holds this way, that it's not a blanket allowance, that you could only allow Amir L'Nachri in a case of great loss, or if somebody has a great need to do a mitzvah. Why? Because the Yam Shel Shleima, according to the Pri Megadim, holds that you can't just rely on this other psak. The halacha has already been determined according to the stringent psak. That's the halacha. The Beir Hagara, citing Mishna Berura note 7 above, who maintains that the practical law actually follows the Rishonim who hold that even absolute seish does not apply. Caleb, nonetheless, breaking the lock by means of a non-Jew would still be permitted under extenuating circumstances discussed here, since one would be instructing the non-Jew to perform a rabbinic prohibition in breaking the lock, as mentioned in the footnote above, and we permit instructing a non-Jew to perform a shavus, to perform a rabbinical prohibition, in certain extenuating circumstances. Ask your local rabbi if this is a extenuating circumstance or not. However, the Mishnah Berura brings something very interesting, is that all of this relates to breaking the lock. However, picking a lock with a knife or a large needle is permitted, even the door of a home, even not a kli, even not a movable item, even a door connected to the ground. Picking the lock, we're not talking about. That's not a problem because you haven't broken it. That is essentially the same as opening it with a key. Springing the lock in this manner is tantamount to opening it with a key rather than breaking it. This is based on the Mishnah, which states that one may use a large needle to open a door, meaning to pick its lock if he lost the key. Because essentially, you're doing with the needle the same thing that all the key is doing, is it has little ridges, and those ridges are pushing a thing in, and all you're doing is you're doing the same thing in a slightly more difficult way. So it would not be a problem.
The same function, just with a different tool.
Yeah.
Like you're still doing it, same action.
Right, but you're not actually breaking. You're not only you're not breaking, you're not even taking it apart or anything.
Right.
You're leaving the lock as it were.
Right. It's still functional afterwards.
Yeah. Siman ches.
Sif.
Sif ches. Sorry. I tried to jump back a lot of Siman, huh? Jump back 3:14 to 8.
Maybe you're trying to jump ahead to Shin Yud Ches.
Yeah, maybe. So now, Chisolis, Perish B'nei Kelim, tomorrow Grigaris. A chisol is a vessel which holds dates or dried figs. If the cover is tied with a rope, matir v'seiser shar shereis hachevel v'chedich afilu v'saket. He can take apart he can take apart the same thing like I said before. He can take the nuts. He can untie it. He can cut it, or he can even take the weave apart. Right. Matir v'seiser shar zechevel v'chedich afilu v'saket. V'afilu gufon shel chisolis. And even these containers themselves, right? Unlike the jugs, because these basically these are vessels that are made to like just cover the.
It's wrapping. It kind of reminds me of like modern day like plastic bags, the bread bags, challah bags. You know, like. Yeah. It's not so much. It is technically a keli, but it's just meant to be the wrapping for the food. So ripping up into the bag, or whatever,
it's subservient to the food. That's all it's doing. It's guarding this food. Yeah, very good. It's a good example, modern day example. It's a good newy timey example.
Right.
So it's just like walnuts are cracking almonds in order to remove the food that is within them. Mishna Berura, Chas. These are vessels that are made from like what do you call it, from palm fronds. Yeah, fronds. You see, very fancy palm fronds. Kimin salim, like kind of like a basket, right? It's made like a basket. And you put inside of it, if you have the fruits that have not yet become ripened, you put it inside in order to become ripe. These dates, if they pick them not ripe, they put them in these fronds, and that helps them ripen. Right,
like putting bananas in a paper bag or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or avocados or this kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So he said if the cover is tied with rope or whatever. The truth is, this is all the same as Siv Zayin. Why? Because the same as a rope. Basically, he's telling us these chisolis are considered inferior kelim, just like a rope. But he brings it. Why? He brings it so that we understand the conclusion. Right? The So why is he bringing this down at all? He's bringing it down to let us know that even the body of these chesoles, whereas before the jug itself is a problem, but the rope itself you can cut or undo, etc., etc. So why is he bringing this? To let us know that all these things, it's not just not just the rope itself, but not just the rope, but even the chesolis themselves, even this whole package itself, you're allowed to undo and cut, etc., etc. It's just like breaking nuts. And this is specifically talking about, don't think this means any sort of basket made out of fronds. Because there are, for example, if you go they have in the Caribbean, they have these weaved baskets and things like this, and they're made out of different fronds or whatever, different wide leaves. There's one made out of banana leaf or whatever. But if it's made as to be an actual vessel, then it's a problem. It's not. It's specifically only when it's made as a wrapping for these food items that then it's not a problem.
Right. What's the mat reminds me of, it's kind of like those sushi mats, you use to roll up the sushi, but you don't use it at the store or anything. You're just using it to shape it.
I think that's a different thing that he brings later.
Right. That's right. Because that's not for storage. That's more for like the forming of the food. That's
and I think he brings. I don't know if he doesn't call it a sushi mat, but I think he brings something like that's very similar to not necessarily in function, but at least in its build, he brings something very similar to a sushi mat that's like made out of reeds or whatever. But I think it's like wrapping up fruit or whatever. I'm not sure. We'll get to that when we get to that. I guess.
We'll see. Maybe in the notes.
Yeah. Okay. Notes.
Okay. So notes. First, note A for 38. So we're talking about the interwoven palm leaves, like a basket. So the word chaisel means an enveloping paper, an enveloping wrapper, cognate with the word chitul, a cloth that swaddles a baby. So it's related to chaisel, chitul. Yeah. Well, I think it's more the swaddle, like the baby blanket. The blanket, the baby blanket, just a full swaddle, and totally wrapped tight all around, so the baby stays nice and fresh for consumption. No, which
is amazing because even back then they know about this thing, right?
Exactly. Age-old stuff, Some things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
If it wakes, it wakes, right?
Right, exactly. So you put bad dates, unripe. So dates that had failed to ripen on the palm were placed in these baskets whose heat facilitated the ripening process. So it's not so much that it was the material of palm fronds, like the example I gave, like the brown paper bag, but dafka. No, this is more about just that it keeps it warm, so it helps it ripen up. Shulchan Aruch mentions dried figs were also placed into chesoles, not just unripe fruit, but also dried stuff, just to keep it, I guess, maybe keep it moist. I don't know, keeping it from getting too hard. I don't know. Anyway, so then we kept going. C. So that was before the cracking the walnuts. It's like cracking walnuts. With regards to a full-fledged, so that was, it's not a full-fledged keli, but a full-fledged keli, the Shulchan Aruch already ruled. He said you're not allowed to. It's usher. Shulchan Aruch maintains the malacha of seiser. So this is a nice long one. The whole malacha of seiser applies to full-fledged keli. The statement of the Mishna Berura is based on the Mogen Avraham. Prima Gadim notes the apparent inconsistency. Is the comparison of chaysalos to nutshells, which then you're allowed to break chesolis due to the fact that they cause the dates to ripen the same way a shell, improves the fruit, or it's because it's an inferior keli. Which one is it? And must both conditions be met to permit breaking them? Sachareim take various approaches to this question, which then affect the permissibility of opening contemporary packages.
Right, like you were saying before, that like nowadays we have sandwich bags and things. So to say the same thing, we have. Nowadays, you probably deal with more types of packages and containers than any prior time in history.
Right. If it's a bad container, then I can't really call, some of these airtight wrappers for chocolate bars or whatever a bad container, because that stuff will keep it fresh for ages.
Yeah.
But if you're talking just because, no, it's just like a shell and it's just about keeping the food good, then it is like a shell, But yeah, so what's good container, bad container? Maybe it's a bad container because it's only one-time use, but then, okay, so then once it's not one-time use, then it's a Ziploc, maybe it's, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure we're about to get into it. So the Acharonim take various approaches. So Prima Gadim understands, according to Magen Avraham, both conditions have to be met. Thus, only a kli that's broken of inferior, that it's both inferior quality and it serves to ripen its contents can be broken under the permit of chesolis. This approach, however, encounters a number of difficulties. Aleph, the Prima Gadim points out that chesolis that contain dried figs do not ripen them. They're dried. It doesn't ripen them. The Shulchan Aruch indicates that they can be broken. Chesolis for dried figs is okay. Bay's passage I, I don't know if that's a 1 or letter I, taught that even a refurbished jug may be opened in order to access its contents, despite the fact the jug does not ripen its contents, because it's a bad container. It's refurbished, or reconstructed, right? See, here's Moshe. The Pri Megadim himself maintains that the kli must either serve to ripen or be of inferior quality. And the Igros Moshe questions that approach as well. So that's number 1. Is it both or is it either or? The Pri Megadim even seems to flip either or. Tehillah David maintains that according to the Magen Avraham, the sole criterion is that the kli is inferior. It's not about ripening. It's just that it's a bad package. It's cheap. It's throwaway.
In other words, the fact that he brings the ripening, he's just bringing an example of an inferior kli, but not that that's a qualification, basically.
Right. I guess, yeah. So here, he's about to say, the Magen Avraham means to say, since the chesolos were made only to ripen dates, they were made in an inferior fashion. And like you said, it's an example of something, show that it's not good. See also the Aruch Shulchan. The same applies to chesolos that were made to store figs. They too were made in inferior fashion. Rav Moshe Feinstein finds this difficult. If this were the case, then the Shulchan Aruch had no reason to introduce this comparison to nutshells. Why bring up the whole shelling thing? The permit to break the chesolos is precisely the same as breaking open a refurbished jug, which was already presented earlier. Tehillah David seems to indicate, though, that our passage means to teach that the permit to break open inferior kalim is not limited to refurbished ones, but extends to any kalim of inferior quality. So Tehillah David seems to say, no, it's just about the fact that it's a bad package. It's throwaway, it's crumbly, it's bad. Yeah. Minchas Yitzchak, like the Petuchei Chaisam, as Petuchei Chaisam interprets, indicates that since the chesolos serve their contents in some way, and so it does improve the contents itself, and they're immediately thrown away. So the fact that it is keeping it fresh or making it ripen more or whatever, and then you throw them away right after serving that purpose. So then they lose their status of kalim, even if they're superior quality. So it's hard quality plastic. It's good stuff, but it doesn't matter. You're throwing it away right away. So
like you were saying about these. That's like you were saying about these airtight wrappers. Fine, it's it'll hold them forever, etc., but they're made to throw away right away.
Right, yeah, it's only one-time use. You can't reseal it or anything. So this includes preventing the contents from going bad, but does not include a situation in which the kli serves only as a container, such as dairy product containers. In any event, kalim that might be kept by the owner after they're opened and emptied would not fall under this permit of chesolos. So, like some sort of mason jar or something, or like certain sauce jars, so you could totally reuse those.
Or even in certain Appalachian areas, Cool Whip containers,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're resealable tops. Yeah. Why not? Why wouldn't it? All the cookie tins or the, peanut butter jars, jelly jars, you can reuse those.
Yeah.
So Rav Moshe Feinstein is somewhat more lenient. So, okay, now we get to Rav Moshe himself. Rav Moshe himself is somewhat more lenient and maintains that even if the chesolos are made for storage, as long as they're discarded immediately after opening them, they lose the status of kalim that are comparable to nutshells, regardless of their quality.
So meaning your average peanut butter jar, jelly jar. He doesn't care that it can be saved or whatever. He holds tachlis. Are you going to save this or are you throwing this out?
Right, which it's funny. My perfect example is a jelly jar. Mamish continues on to say, it is of note that Mishna Berura rules that a jam container made from hoops does not have the status of inferior keli since it was made that way from the outset. It's sturdy, unlike a container held together by ropes, and therefore it can but not be dismantled. Clearly, it does not have the status of chesolos. This may be because Mishna Berura maintains the permit of chesolos applies only to inferior kelim, or because the containers were somewhat kept even after they were emptied to their contents.
Right.
But meaning, as opposed to Rav Moshe who says, no, even if it could be, doesn't matter. Today, especially today.
Are you throwing it out? Tachlis? Are you discarding it
once they throw it in recycling? Yeah. Yes, you're right. Recycling technically means it will be reused, but it's one-time use for your average person.
Right. Yeah.
Which to that, it almost seems to imply that it would depend then on the person's kavanah. If the person intends to keep it, then it makes a difference.
That's what it sounds like he's saying. It's about what are you doing with it.
Right. But now, Baruch Hashem, we're not done, because now we're saying to understand how this relates to open a canon of preserves. So reiterate a few points brought up previously in passage 1. First of all the above addresses why there's no prohibition of seisem breaking the chesolos. A further issue that must be addressed is whether there is a prohibition against making an opening in them. To that end, the Mishnah Berura ruled that it's entirely forbidden to make an opening in an inferior keli due to tikkun monet. I just improved upon it. Thus, again, if we presume that their permit to break the chesolos is because they're inferior, then you're not allowed to make an opening in them if they're inferior.
Right.
For discussion as to whether there's a prohibition to make an opening in the chesolis, if the license to break them is because they're subordinate to food, just like, and whether that extends to can of preserves, then that you have to see between chesolis. So it must be noted that the Chazon Ish maintains making an indiscriminate gash in a can of preserves is equivalent to making a meticulous opening in a jug. A jug already has a functional opening and is a kli. So you have to make a meticulous opening in it to be liable. A sealed can of preserves, however, is not a kli until one opens it. So using the can opener.
Right.
So making even an indiscriminate gash in it is forbidden because you just can't access the stuff. You didn't make it a kli until you opened it, so it doesn't matter which way you open it. Shalom Zalman Auerbach and the Minchas Yitzchak assert that even if we're to accept this position of the Chazon Ish, the issue can be overcome by first puncturing a small hole in the bottom of the can, thus making it completely unusable even before it opens, and then opening it on top of the usual manner. So now, second of all, the above discussion presumes the view of those Rishonim who maintain that the malacha of Seiser applies to intact kalim. So when you messed up kalim, do not. According to those who do not, though, it says no, you don't need it at all for any of the above rationales to permit opening the kalim. As Mishna ruled in note 1, based on Shulchan Aruch, Siv Zayin, the lenient view provides basis to allow instructing a non-Jew to open the kli. A final point that must be noted is that aside from the issue of Seiser, breaking open the chesolis also poses no concern for the malacha of kareya, tearing. And this is either because the chesolis are subservient to the food, it's like a shell, or because they're merely an impediment to accessing their contents. You're not trying to make a keli to distribute the contents. I just want to get to it, and this is in my way. Where are these rationales? Where are these? See the footnote to passage 6, where we discuss this in connection with tearing leather off a jug. See also the Berura here, which explains where there's no issue of Korei and tearing the ropes that tie the chesolis. The same would apply to the chesolis themselves. Practically speaking, the poskim strongly encourage opening all packages before Shabbos. For further discussion regarding opening cans, bags, boxes, and packages on Shabbos, see in the back contemporary halacha discussions, page 226.
Which I think we did already before.
Yeah. But yeah, it is that classic thing when it comes to even the totally disposable bags inside the cereal box. So not even talking about the box, but throwing bags inside, it is best to open those before Shabbos. Lamaisa, if it's not, you try to cut it in a way where it destroys it, doesn't make it keli, you can't pour it out, just like bust it and ruin it, which that's why I try to have like these plastic containers for my cereal that I could then pour it directly into right away and throw it away right away to try to go at least according to as many opinions as possible if I, didn't open up that Shabbos cereal for my kids before Shabbos.
Right.
Okay. So now
there's the last Mishna Berura here.
Oh yeah, so we just said regarding a mat which those fruits
is Sheshever. There's another Mishna Berura. Sheshever Geizim.
I thought you did that already.
We have a Mishna Berura 40. So that he breaks that he's breaking like breaking nuts. The davki honey the lav kelim gemurim mehem. The ena masuyin elo she's bashlo at tamar b'seicham. Specifically, the mechaber is allowing this by the things that are not complete vessels, that they're only made for ripening these dates inside them. But if it's an actual full keli, the mechaber already said you're not allowed to do it already earlier on in the Siman. And a mat that they tie that they sow fruits into it. The Prima Godim is unsure whether or not they are considered like if it's considered like chesolis or not.
It's also not right. So the rest of these mats. So the note says fruit is wrapped in a mat, which is then sewn shut to form a wrapper. You then show the mat shut.
Yeah.
So imagine like a sushi mat, but then you sew like the ends had like a zipper or something.
Yeah.
Some sort of tie string, and then the Prima he's not sure if it's comparable to chesolis or not. So the Prima Godim maintains the reason one can open chesolis if they are of superior quality is because they serve the dates by ripening them rather than as a container, meaning it's doing a purpose for the fruit. So then it's like a shell. This mat, however, it doesn't serve the fruits at all, meaning it's air is coming through. It doesn't hold in heat. It's not keeping it fresh. It's merely a convenient way to wrap them. It's just a way to hold it. Accordingly, they would not qualify as chesolis. On the other hand, the Prima Godim raises the possibility that since these mats have no receptacle area, they're merely wrapped around their contents. They're inherently not kelim. Not a bowl or a bag or whatever. It's just wrapped around. So therefore, it can be turned open regardless of their quality. So even the Pri Megadim, who's saying it's not even according to him, which it has to be serving the fruit. So in this case, it's not even serving the fruit, but it's still, it finds a loophole. It squeaks through the smallest loophole in the fact that it doesn't have a receptacle to hold it.
Right.
So it's just kind of wrapped around it like the way you wrap old fish in newspaper or whatever, you know, or like the candy wrappers where it's just the twisty ties.
Right.
It's no real bowl. It's not really a bag or anything. It's just
it's not a keli.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, even though it's sewn at the ends, yeah, that's interesting. All right. I will say, I did have something else come up. It's 5:00, so I do have something else coming up like now / shortly / now. I don't know if this is a good place to stop, or you think we should quickly do. Test doesn't look very long.
Okay,
let's
so
maybe just do test.
You're allowed to undo or to cut the knots that are on the skewers of that are tied to a roasted lamb or a roasted bird. Berura, one may be cut. Why? Because severing a string is permitted for an item, right? Something that is not attached to the ground, you are allowed to untie a knot or a string rather. And it does not have the malacha of mechatich, which is cutting to size. Why? Because you're not cutting it to a specific size. You don't care what size it's cut to. You're just trying to release it from the spit. The Paiskim write that somebody who chops wood into large pieces, it is only a rabbinical prohibition. Why? Because it is a weekday type activity. Meaning he's saying it's not mechatich because you're not cutting it into small pieces.
Right.
However, somebody who cuts it into very small pieces, he's liable for teichin, for grinding. However, even if he's cutting it into big pieces and it's not grinding and it's large pieces, however, if he's particular about the size, right? Like for example, you're going to put it in a fireplace and it has to be a certain size to be in this fireplace, then since you're cutting it to a certain size, you do have this problem of mechatich even when it is big pieces. Kishri hashapud, the ties, the knots of the spit, of the skewers. Same idea is when you have fruits that are tied or sewed together with a string, right? Like like they have those circles of the fig circles tied together.
Right. That's what I was just thinking.
You are allowed to undo or to cut the string.
Right. Okay. So we said, because severing a string is allowed, like we said before in Zion. Shulchan taught there that what you can cut through ropes to fasten or cover to a kli. The Mishnah Berura explained that this is not considered absolute say, so all Rishonim would permit it. There's no issue of kereya, as the special bir halacha. Severing a rope that is attached to the ground, though, is forbidden under Seiser, as will be discussed in Yud. And then moving right along, so we said, doesn't matter cutting it to size, no, not b'chatach, because you're not particular about the size. Cutting the strings is only in order to separate the skewer from the lamb of the bird. So the size of the severed rope is of no interest. So who cares what size the string ends up being? Doesn't matter if it's long or short. Right. And then we said, okay, so large things, it's just uvn d'chayil, so it's d'rabbanan. So what uvn d'chayil includes a broad range of activities that are forbidden by rabbinic law due to their weekday-like nature. They include activities that Chazal deem to be infringements on the ambience of Shabbos. It's just not Shabbos vibes, man.
Right.
Beis, activities that bear some resemblance to one of the malachas. It looks like you're doing it. Yeah, you're right. It's not, but it's mirrored to a malacha.
Like we had before with the different things for the lock, the rod, the peg. Those were all an issue of looks like something.
It looks like actual boine. It looks like actual makar pater. So it's problem.
Right. Which was not a matter of not to be confused with you may come to by the lock. We weren't at all about that. Yeah. Okay.
It just looked. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah, we're very superficial people. Gimel, activities that when done in the usual weekday manner, then like you just mentioned, then that could actually lead to a malach. So first it just messes up the vibe. Secondly, it's more than just messes up the vibe. It actually parallels,
Right.
Third, not only does it parallel, it doesn't parallel, it actually could lead to something. And then Dalid, activities that involve excessive exertion. We're getting a massage right now from a jackfruit.
You're getting excessive exertion. See, at Shabbos, the jackfruit might be a problem. Is it excessive exertion or not?
Yeah, which is see the kakelas. Shabbos also consists Shulchan, Badi Shulchan. Yeah. So with regards to the category of udon l'chol to which chopping wood belongs, all four possibilities appear in an achronim. The Alter Rebbe states that it's a disgrace to the sanctity of Shabbos. Hilchos Gevirta asserts that it bears some resemblance to the Melech of Teichen. Kalkelos Shabbos explains that it's an example of the third type of udon l'chol, since when chopping wood during the week, one first chops the log into large chunks and then into smaller pieces. So we're concerned, person chopping the wood into large pieces, he might then continue to chop into small pieces. Like, oh, you know what? I actually need some kindling. You know what? I could use a few toothpicks around the house. I could use a few, And with that would actually be teichen. And finally, the Chuvas Kadmon David says it's forbidden because you're exerting yourself. Come on, it's hard work. Get a good schwitz going when you're chopping wood. Now, Sharat Tzion says chopping wood into large pieces, it's dirabanan. It's only dirabanan. It's issue dirabanan. Accordingly, if one is forced by a non-Jew to cut wood on Shabbos, it's better to chop it into large pieces and not use a saw. So there, you sit in Mendel Futterwas in Siberia, and they say chop the wood. Right. Okay, so use a saw, because sawing, you're liable for teichen creating sawdust.
Right. So better.
So don't use the saw. So don't use the saw, because then you're making sawdust. So use a hatchet or whatever. As you see in the Rambam Mishna, so there, Rambam states you're liable if the intention is to benefit from that sawdust. The Mishna there points out, however, that Rambam is only to preclude a case in which does not want to derive any benefit at all from cutting the wood, but you're bedafka trying to get thing. But if it's sawdust, but if you actually want the wood, then you're liable for creating the sawdust. And so according to the Rambam, one is liable for malacha she'eino tzarich gufa, malacha not needed for its own sake. It emerges then that according to most Rishonim who maintain that one is not liable for malacha she'eino tzarich gufa, one would not actually be liable for sawing the wood if one's intention is only to chop the wood and not create the sawdust.
Right, as mentioned, like we had it before, according to the Rambam, when it came to. With the other thing, with untying the ropes, that according to the Rambam, since you don't care about it, it's for the Rambam doesn't. Paskins is fine. Same thing here. Yeah.
So it emerges in the most Rishonim who maintain that one is not liable for malacha she'eino tzarich gufa. They don't hold like the Rambam, most Rishonim, then one would not actually be liable for sawing the wood if your intention is just to get the wood and not create sawdust. So it depends if you passing like the Rambam or not. Shuvas. Machzel Yo proves from the Alter Rebbe that udon l'chol should be permitted when there's a great necessity. He therefore questions why the Sharat Tzion then says it's better to chop wood into large pieces. Since the non-Jew is forcing him to chop the wood, then that's surely a great necessity and it's totally mutter. So Machzel Yo answers this question based on the distinction presented in the footnote there. Only those types of udon l'chol that have no association with the malacha are permitted for a great necessity. Those that are associated with the malacha, in this case teichen, have no such dispensation. You can't just great necessity. I don't know why I'm blanking on the actual term. Doesn't create this term, but yeah, it's not good. So Machzel Yo asserts the Sharat Tzion here follows the Kalkelos Shabbos citing Tzarich Gadol. Thank you. Cited in the beginning of this footnote, who maintains the udon l'chol here is on account of concern for violation of teichen. Alternatively, he might follow Hilchos Gevirta, but either way, you could see safer udon l'chol. Don't safer on it. Go nuts if you want to know more. So now he said, but if you go small, then you're actually grinding. That's teichen. Shlomo Auerbach maintains that to be liable, the wood need not be chopped into tiny pieces. You're liable even once the chips are small enough to be used as firewood. Once it's small enough for firewood, that's small enough for a specific use, then trouble is afoot. Now, then we said, okay, so the same is true also, the knots on the skewer. It's also any sort of string, like you said, the figs, the wreath of figs or whatever. So you can also cut the string surrounding stuffed derma, like kishke or chicken. So says the Alter Rebbe and the Shemini Shabbos Kol Chasa. I always picture, like the netting that's on like brisket, these certain roasts and stuff, yeah. But also a lot of turkeys, stuffed turkeys, whatever. You have the netting to keep it bound so the stuffing doesn't make it pop open, expand. So one may not separate the string from the chicken due to malacha of boirer, selecting. Oh, that's interesting.
So you have to be very careful to take the net off, even though you could cut it.
If you cut it, then you can cut it, but then just cut it and pull the meat out. You can't be pulling the string off.
Which is very hard to do because if you pick up the meat, the string comes with it. That's why it's much better in this case Take the string
I will
off
say
before Shabbos. Yeah.
it's interesting, and I've seen this, and I've done this, and I don't think I realized why. But yeah, when it was taka roast on Shabbos Yom Tif, where basically cut the slices with the net, because then the net will basically just fall off on its own. It's just small
see
pieces.
what I do is bichlal, I move the net, and I cut the roast. I cut the roast anyways before. Why? Because I like my roast cut in very, very thin slices, and on Shabbos is a problem with cutting in such
right. So
slices
exactly.
anyways. So I always I take the net off the thing, and then I cut the thin slices, put it back.
So you're cooking it that way anyway.
Yeah.
There you go.
So that's not
all right. Okay. Yasher Kayach, we're up to Yud. We're up to Yud, and we'll Be'ez Hashem hopefully continue later today.
Okay.
Later this evening.
If I bring it later at some point, but yeah.
No, not that late. But hopefully again, but like after 7, between 7 and 8:15 or something.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yasher Kayach.